Okay, so there's two key concepts that we take away from the concept translation. One is that what it means to be human is to be both a body and a soul. Material resurrection is a core part of our belief. So we are both material and we are soul, and we can know the soul exists through introspection. So we can know that the soul exists through rational thought. Okay. So, and then the challenge before us is how do we reconcile this with what modern science is telling us? So now let's go back to the basics and let's do this activity, which will help put everything in context about how we can rationally justify all of the claims that we are making. So in this activity, we're going to ask all of you to think about what is the world made of? What are the types of things that exist in the world? So this is an exercise in ontology, and you guys are going to say it, and I'm going to write it on this board behind me. We can either go in a row, or you guys can just yell it out. Either way works. But basically, you know, what are the components that make up the world? What are the types of things that exist in the world? Is the question. Water. Okay.
Air, fire.
Okay, hold on. How about okay. How about we start in a row and we'll go across. Start with you.
Humans.
Humans, okay, humans. Okay, human is a complex concept, but okay.
I was gonna say like both living and non-living things.
Okay, living and non-living things. Okay. Okay, you can be more specific. Give me an example.
So like rocks, dirt, water, fire, those are
Okay,
non-living,
yeah,
and
dirt,
then there's animals,
water,
humans,
fire,
plants.
plants. Okay, yeah, sorry, my handwriting. I'm a radiologist, so we don't really write. Okay, next. And we can skip if anyone's not comfortable, that's okay. Give me an example of what exists in the world.
Matter.
Matter, yeah, exactly. Okay.
Forces.
Forces, yes, exactly, that's a good one. Okay, I'll put that over here. Like, what do you have in mind, like
when I think of like physics.
Physics,
Yeah,
electromagnetic force, gravity, that type of stuff, okay? Next.
All the elements.
Yeah, the elements in the periodic table, for example.
I don't know,
Right.
108 elements.
Yeah, elements, okay.
Yeah.
Next.
Obviously, oxygen.
Oxygen, okay, okay, oxygen, next, good.
I was actually going to say matter.
Matter, okay, we got another matter, next.
Electricity.
Electricity, is that, okay, yeah, electricity is good. Electricity is a charge. I'm not sure if it's a force or if it's material, but okay, it'll fit somewhere.
Thinking about like the unseen, so like our atmosphere.
So the gases in the atmosphere, or, okay, gases, okay, next. Go ahead.
Yeah.
The forces kind of takes us then. I have an example of like specific force.
Yeah, sure. Okay, we'll say electromagnetism. All right, I want to finish before lunch, so let's just quickly go through. We can skip if you are not comfortable.
I was gonna say concepts like night, day.
Night concepts like night and day. Okay, yeah, I'll say concepts here. Okay.
Celestial bodies.
Celestial by like stars and stuff, okay. Forces, okay, that's fine. You can repeat stuff.
Energy, like thermal energy.
Yeah, okay, energy, we know from physics is a type of, can be converted to matter, right? Or is part of the same spectrum. Okay, that's fine. Protons, neutrons, okay, yeah, like atoms and stuff related to atoms, okay. Go ahead. Time, okay, yeah, time. That over here.
Maybe like landscapes, the depths of the ocean and the heights of mountains.
Yeah, okay, that's a good one. Landscapes. Measurements. Okay, sorry, we're not gonna be able to read any of these.
Space.
Space, okay, next. Animals, okay,
I don't know how, it's been well covered, I think.
yeah, same covered,
Molecules.
molecules, okay, we'll stick atoms and molecules, okay,
Light.
life,
Light.
Light.
light, okay, light, okay, light, maybe we can put here. Okay, so that's everybody. Dark matter, okay, sure, dark matter, okay, dark matter. Okay, okay, very good. So now we have all these things that we think the world is made of. So here, like I've made two different columns here. The first one is all the material stuff that the world is made of: water, humans, matter, elements, oxygen, gases, animals, dark matter, molecules. Okay, and then here we have like concepts, like we have some building blocks of nature and some concepts. These things don't necessarily exist on their own. They're sort of, but some of them do. Like for example, the forces. The forces are what we consider in physics to be like the building blocks of nature, right? So those are just, we take them for granted. And then there's things like, landscape is a concept. But so, these things are special cases. These are all material. For our purpose, there's a third category here that we're missing that's going to be very relevant to our discussion. What are we missing?
Consciousness.
Yes. Yes, there's a massive category here called consciousness, and there's a lot of things that fit under there that are called qualia. So what about smell, taste? What about, we talked about anger, hate, love, jealousy. Do these things exist in the world? So, they're all over here. And like, we're all sort of trained in the way, in the methods of science. So, if I were to say, we would say the same things. But the question is, what, if we have a theory of the world, do we need it to explain all of this, or is this explaining this enough? We would need to explain everything. And then the question is, where do these things exist? So where do the sensory experiences exist? So the color of the globe, the smell of a lemon, the taste of a banana, does it exist in the banana? Or if it doesn't exist there, where does it exist? It has to be somewhere. Some people would say it exists in the mind, or it exists in the object. The Greek philosophers would say it exists in the object. Now you might say they exist in the mind. We'll talk about that. And then the other question is, right, perceptions like anger, like the Sheikh Omar talked about. Where do those exist? We would say those exist in the soul. Okay, so just to summarize, like I think this is very useful. It wasn't in the original seminar that we taught, but now that I learned more about it, I think this sort of, the way that the traditional classical Muslim theologians looked at ontology, I think is very useful for us to have in our mind when we look at how it's presented in the West. So in the Kalam tradition, the Ash'ari Maturidi tradition, this is generally how the world is understood. So the world is consisting of jawahir. Jawahir are atoms, and these atoms, they come together to form jism, or a body. So this is the material world. In Western language, we would call this brain or body, or any material thing. And then there are a second category of stuff that's called arad, or accidents. So material. So whereas jawahir is a substance is something that exists independently. An accident is something that doesn't have any existence on its own. It requires a substance to exist. So for example, the blue color of the ocean, it can only be blue if the ocean exists in the first place. So the material is the ocean, and the accident is the blue color, or the wetness of the water. In Western terms, we would use the word qualia. Qualia are the subjective experiences of the world. So clearly in traditional philosophy of mind or in neuroscience, qualia are considered to be in the brain, properties of the brain or the mind. Whereas in the traditional Muslim view, most of the accidents are going to exist in the material, except for certain things, which are going to, and there's going to be a special category for this. There's another type of substance that exists in the case of the human being, and that is the soul. So, and for that, the word that's used is Jawhar al-Latif, or a subtle or immaterial substance. And so substance, like we think of substance typically as a material thing, but it does not have to be a material thing. It could be understood in other ways. You can have immaterial substance, you can have organizing principles, and the accidents of the soul are called idrak. In English, you would say perception. So we have concepts like Sheikh Omar said, anger, jealousy, those types of things. Our perceptions are gonna fall in that category. And then how is all of this held together? In the Aristotelian view, for example, the accidents were inherent in the material. But in the Muslim view, the idea is that everything is held together by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times. So nothing has any intrinsic property or value. Any property or value it has, it's by God creating that correlation at all times. And that's a whole nother discussion, but the idea is that the regularity of nature is held together by God at all times and all places, which allows us to have a predictable universe in which we can do science. So this idea of interaction, how do these things interact? They interact because that's God's custom, it's ada, that's how he has set up the world. Because causation is a problem in secular philosophy as well, because so that's, I'm gonna skip that, so because it's not directly relevant. Okay, so here we're going to see how from the traditional view of the world, how from traditional ontology, which included all the stuff that no one mentioned. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you explain the terms again, the ones that like material accident, they're not from Muslim theology, and Joab?
Okay, so Johar is Adam. So the idea is that the world is made up of indivisible particles. These particles come together to form bodies. So like this sort of table here is made up of different atoms, and this forms this table. The table has accidents, like for example, it has the hardness or softness of the table. The hardness or the softness is an accident because it wouldn't exist if there was no table. So the table is a substance, whereas the hardness and softness is an accident of it. And this is like accidents of broad. I don't want to get into all the details because it's going to distract from the main. And then Johar al-Latif is another type of substance that's considered a subtle or immaterial substance that is a special case in the human being, and that's what the soul is. Because we want to maintain that the human being is both a composite of a body and a soul, and both of them have to have independent existence. So the soul doesn't go away so the soul is not an accident, and the soul has its own accidents, which are perception. Does that make sense? Kind of. Okay.
What is
Arad are accidents. Arad would be the hardness or softness of the table. It's something that's transient, that's dependent on that doesn't have an independent existence. It depends on the substance for its existence. It goes away. Whereas the substance doesn't go away, the soul doesn't go away, but your thoughts can go away in the Muslim view. Okay, so now let's look at the development of modern science and how we went from a view of the world like the Aristotelian view of the world or the traditional Muslim view of the world to now where we only say material stuff with material properties exists. But let's look at this. Let's look on the right side of the screen at this apple. I couldn't find one from the hotel we stayed at because, you know, Dr. Austin didn't book us the Hilton, we were just at the, yeah. But anyways, but let's just take a look at the picture here. So, the question is, what are some properties of this apple?
Red.
Okay, good. Hey, good. Yeah, right. So you're saying it's red, but according to modern science and physics, it's not red. The red is only a concept in your mind. What this actually has is wavelength and frequency. What it actually has is only quantitative features like size and so forth and weight. But commonly we would think that the apple is red. It's against our intuition and it's against our common sense. So what's happened is that we separated the qualia and moved all that stuff to the mind, and we were left with this sort of the physical, mathematical representation of the world, and now we're trying to use that to explain the mind and the soul, which was deliberately removed from the physical world in the first place. And the person that we can hold responsible for this, if we can, is this guy on the top left, Rene Descartes, which, you know, it's questionable to what degree he's responsible, but he's one of the people who articulated this idea called Cartesian dualism. And you guys know Descartes? Anyone know anything about Descartes? What is he famous for? Yeah, I think therefore I am, right? So that's a very good thought experiment. It's a very solid experiment in which he basically says that I can doubt everything in the world. The one thing that I can't doubt is the existence of myself. There has to be something that exists that's having the experience of the world, and therefore the soul has to exist, and there has to be some entity that's experiencing the world that's not physical, right? So he's using introspection to prove the existence of the soul. So that will become relevant later. But one of the side effects, to use a medical word from that, is that he created a sharp division between physical stuff and mental stuff. This guy was a mathematician by training. And at that time, you're at this point in Europe where there's a conflict between the Catholic Church and the scientists. So what he does is that he says, you know, there's physical stuff in the world, and that stuff you can explain by these quantitative measures like mass, like charge, temperature, which basically covers most of what's on this chart. And then there's other stuff that's the subjective experience of the world, like the sense, taste, vision, and thoughts, for example. And these belong in a separate category. This is all mental stuff, and this belongs to the soul. So what happens here is that this allows the scientists to do science without having to worry about additional metaphysical consequences of what they're doing. In the end, it removes any like meaning, purpose from the physical world. Very useful for imperialism and so forth. Anyways, so then, okay, and then in terms of talking about consciousness, this is a useful slide because basically all of these things that are subjective experiences of the world, like sensation, smell, taste, and vision, in the world of neuroscience, these would fall under experiences of consciousness, perceptions, and thoughts. Descartes thought that the soul was a thinking substance, which slightly differs from the Islamic conception, where thinking is not required for the soul, but that's Descartes' view. Feeling, love, anger, so forth, these are all subjective experiences that are going to be part of consciousness. And then there's advanced states of consciousness. For example, there's self-awareness, not only our anger, but our awareness of our anger, right? It's second level phenomenal consciousness. And then there's intentionality that Sheikh Omar referenced. Intentionality is our ability to think about something else. We could be here, but we could be thinking about Kuala Lumpur. This is like a uniquely human ability, right? And then also understanding and knowledge, like not just our ability to know stuff and have a feeling of understanding would all fall under consciousness. Okay, so what he does is that he separates the physical stuff out. So this when we talk about the scientific revolution in Europe, this is exactly what happens. So if you look at Galileo, this was his main thing that he says mathematics is the language in which God has written the universe. If you look at Newton's main book, which is the one on the right in Latin, the book is entitled The Mathematical Principles for Natural Philosophy, the mathematical principle on which the universe runs. So everything that we have in modern science is stuff that can be represented mathematically. Of course, this was not a new idea. The Muslim scientists had already been working on things of this sort, like Jabir Ben-Han, but they never discounted the stuff that could not be represented mathematically. But what happens in the West and in the world is that this sort of mathematical representation of science is so successful that science takes off, and like we're able to do amazing things, build weapons and ships and go to the moon and all this stuff, that people begin to think that, wait, maybe we can use this to now solve the remaining mystery that's left, which is the mystery of human consciousness. Because there were other things in the past, like maybe thunderstorms or eclipses that we thought were like godly interventions, but now we can basically explain them by empirical modern science. So can we apply it to the brain? So this ends up being like the dominant hypothesis in modern neuroscience. We have Francis Crick here, who is well known for his DNA work, I believe. And he writes, "You, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and associated molecules." And here there's like a 1.5 minute clip from Nova that we can play. Nova is like you guys know what Nova is, it's a PBS documentary series. Just so we can reinforce the idea of how dominant this view is.
The brain is one of the most complex objects that we know of in the universe.
There are more connections in your brain than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So we literally walk around with about 10,000 galaxies worth of neuronal connections in one of our brains.
That vast web of connections creates you. But how?
Figuring out how the brain implements the mind is a massive challenge.
It seems as though the world just pours itself into the mind through the transparent windows of the eyes and the ears and all our other senses.
But is what we see, hear, and feel real?
You might think that the reality outside is actually what you're perceiving. And the answer is no, it really isn't.
Almost at the very first moment, we are transforming reality.
It feels so real because we don't know better. Think about illusions.
Do you remember the dress?
Of course. It's like a celebrity, the dress.
A polarizing debate that took over the internet.
White and gold, blue and black.
Illusions are fascinating. They're like fractures in the matrix.
Ow, isn't that interesting?
They reveal to us that the way we perceive things isn't necessarily the way they are.
Could you be the biggest illusion of all?
Your sense of who you are is an illusion, as everything else. You're no exception.
Your brain, perception deception. Right now on Nova.
Okay, so you can see like how we're conflating our experiences with the brain, and this is basically the dominant view in neuroscience, is attempting to explain consciousness using the methods of modern science. And how does this happen? Let's look at some of the science, and since most of you are in the medical field, this will be interesting to you. These are all the theories that exist out there about consciousness, and you can all of the top ones are all materialistic theories, and even some of the bottom ones are more or less materialistic. So this is how dominant this view is. And there's a principle in philosophy called Occam's razor, which is that whenever you have a problem, you want to find the simplest solution to it. You don't want to, if you can explain the human being without invoking the soul, then there's no need to invoke the soul, for example. Okay, so is this a CAT scan or a MRI? And what type of, what do you guys think? Yeah, so these are MRI, these are, what is it, T1 or T2? No, so T2 is a fluid weighted sequence, so fluid would be bright on T2. So here you don't see any CSF, it's all dark. So these are T1 weighted images, and these are, this is a conventional sagittal T1, that's a functional MRI image. So, what is that? So in terms of talking about the neural correlates of consciousness and where consciousness exists in the brain, what do we know about the brain and how well does it correlate with consciousness? So there's two systems that we can talk about. First one is the sort of reticular activating system, which is associated with wakefulness. So when you have a patient who has often these patients with dementia or who have difficulty with arousal or wakefulness or awareness, awakeness, they will have problems in this structure here. What is this structure? Hypothalamus is a little bit forward from there, but it's close. This is part of the brainstem. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, midbrain. Are you a medical student or a doctor? Neurologist. No, so this is. I have to be careful here. Yeah, so it's interesting that it's based in the midbrain, and then from there the networks from the cerebral cortex are related to that wakefulness. But that's different from self-awareness. So the key thing about the human being is not just our ability to open our eyes and be awake, but our ability to be aware of ourselves. And a lot of recent work has been done on this part of the brain called the default mode network, which is not a physical part of the brain. It's a series of connections. And the interesting part about it is that it is primarily the midline structures of the brain, the cortical midline structures. So you have, so here's the corpus callosum. So you have the parasagittal parietal lobe where the precuneus is. You have the cingulate gyrus. You have this midline cortex of the parietal lobe. And these are the areas of the brain that once we have a sensation, there is relay of neuronal activity to these regions. And after that, we become aware of that. So for example, if you had a visual experience, we know that it will go through the optic pathway to the, what cortex? Visual cortex. But that, so sometimes you know how you see things, but you have no recollection of it. You might not be aware of it. So for you to be aware of your sensations, from there is the neuronal networks will relay the information to these cortical midline structures, and there's no single structure. You could lose one of them, and you would still be able to have self-awareness. And then from there, this information is processed, and then you become aware of seeing whatever you're looking at. So you can see there's a very close correlation between, our sensations and the brain activity. You can also, we know that brain structure can affect mental states. For example, we know that the frontal lobe is heavily associated with like emotional regulation and so on. So people who've had like lobectomies, traumatic or surgical, can have changes in their personality and behavior just because certain parts of the brain were removed. In the temporal lobes, like there's been several studies on people who have hyperreligiosity or seizures that are where they have outer world experiences, that once they treat the temporal epilepsy, those go away. We know that not just the neuronal networks, but the brain metabolites like hormones and so forth can affect mental states. The whole field of psychiatry, dopamine has been like an amazing drug and all this. We know how it can affect brain states and mental states, like depression, for example. And then we know that it's not just like neuronal structures, like we said, but also neuronal networks, and that are involved in this.
The most important thing is has to be bilateral, all these things.
They have to be, yeah,
Bilateral. If it's only one,
okay, yeah,
then it won't work, right? The consciousness has to be bilaterally. All this network has to be operating both sides.
both sides have to be operational.
Otherwise, no awareness.
Ye- I see.
Can be in coma, stupor.
Yeah, there has to be a connection between, yeah, it's the network, yes.
Wasn't there a study where there was a man who had his corpus callosum removed?
Yeah.
So then what about him? Did he not have consciousness?
No, that was a different level of consciousness.
So the thing with that study was that, the question was, now do you have two people?
Two separate.
Because they had
two
two
people.
separate, yeah. But if you read further about that study and the criticism of that study, it's questionable whether they could actually document that there were two separate personalities there. So that's yeah, but that's a good point. So, yeah. So yeah, so the structure you're talking about is this corpus callosum, which is this big white matter structure which connects the right and left hemispheres of the brain.
The corpus callosum is also important function of understanding things metaphorically.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so like to me, what's interesting is like all these midline structures are involved in all these things that we associate with consciousness, which I didn't know until I started studying this. Okay, so like, when we talk about Cartesian dualism from Descartes, it becomes like, so for Descartes, the idea that consciousness existed somewhere else. It was like, there was a thinking substance that interacted with the brain through he thought the pineal gland, which pineal gland sits over here. And we know it does nothing related to that, right? So, and you can take out the pineal gland. So it has no effect on consciousness. So, Descartes' Cartesian dualism is very tenuous once we know all of this. So there has to be some kind of a closer relationship between the brain and consciousness. And these are some interesting studies that sort of further show us how close the relationship is. So I think I'm short on time, so I might go through this really quick, but these are basically auditory stimuli that are presented to the patient while they're in the MRI machine. And without the patient doing anything, they're looking at the brain activity on the functional MRI and using an AI algorithm to reconstruct the audio that was played to them without them saying anything. So, this has, significant implications for the privacy of conscious experience. There's something that's missing about consciousness here, but we'll let you think about that. And then here, there's, about all of these, what's called computer brain interfaces. And these are becoming increasingly more important in patients who have ALS or traumatic injury to their brainstem or spine, where they're able to translate basically their intentions and thoughts into words and actions. And often, okay. So so have we explained, so based on all this neuroscience that we talked about, are we done? Has physical science explained consciousness? The whole human experience has been explained? What do you guys think? So the answer obviously is no. What's missing in all of this is the first person experience, right? So everything that we've looked at is from an objective third person point of view. What we are not seeing here is, what we still can't explain is why do we have that first person experience of as the American philosopher Nager said, what is it like to hear the audio, right? We can reconstruct the audio, but the experience that the person is having of what it is like to have that audio is not something that's captured by any physical or material science. And if we go back to Descartes' experiment where he said, I think therefore I am, he's basically reaffirming that what his primary existence is not something physical. And there's a similar experiment by Ibn Sina where he says, basically what he's saying is that let's say that God created a human being, but he does not have, he's completely sensorily deprived, right? So it's a brand new human being that has not touched or felt or heard anything yet. Ibn Sina says that even in this situation, the person would have self-awareness. They would at least know that they exist. So our self-existence, our knowledge of ourselves seems to be independent of the physical world, just like Sheikh Hamza indicated. And it's a real, our sense of self is a distinct and real entity. It's not the type of thing where it's just a concept that's used to explain other things. And to talk more about how it's a separate and distinct entity, we'll do these couple, I'll skip over these couple of slides for now, see if you have time for them. But we'll do a couple of thought experiments. And the first one is related to, it's called Mary's Room. And just to further establish the richness of the Muslim tradition, there was a very similar experiment done by the Muslim philosopher Ibn Tufayl, in which he basically says that imagine that there's a blind man who is like a polymath. He's an expert on everything, and but he knows everything. But then when he opens his eyes, like somehow he's miraculously cured. When he opens his eyes, is there something additional that he learned that he didn't know before? And Ibn Tufayl says yes. Like he got there was qualitative addition to his knowledge that didn't exist before. And the same, let me play this short video on Mary's Room, so I'm not the only one talking. And we'll just play, I'll tell you when we can stop it. Mary's Room is a similar experiment that goes to prove that our subjective experience is something in addition to the material substance that the human has.
There's nothing like a good talk, except a better conversation. Northwestern Mutual Advisors ask better questions so they can do more for your goals, your family, and your legacy. Discover a better way to money.
Imagine a brilliant neuroscientist named Mary. Mary lives in a black and white room. She only reads black and white books, and her screens only display black and white. But even though she has never seen color, Mary is an expert in color vision and knows everything ever discovered about its physics and biology. She knows how different wavelengths of light stimulate 3 types of cone cells in the retina, and she knows how electrical signals travel down the optic nerve into the brain. There, they create patterns of neural activity that correspond to the millions of colors most humans can distinguish. Now imagine that one day Mary's black and white screen malfunctions and an apple appears in color. For the first time, she can experience something that she's known about for years. Does she learn anything new? Is there anything about perceiving color that wasn't captured in all her knowledge? Philosopher Frank Jackson proposed this thought experiment, called Mary's Room, in 1982. He argued that if Mary already knew all the physical facts about color vision, and experiencing color still teaches her something new, then mental states, like color perception, can't be completely described by physical facts. The Mary's Room thought experiment describes what philosophers call the knowledge argument, that there are non-physical properties and knowledge which can only be discovered through conscious experience. The knowledge argument contradicts the theory of physicalism, which says that everything, including mental states, has a physical explanation. To most people hearing Mary's story, it seems intuitively obvious that actually seeing color will be totally different than learning about it.
Okay, so in the interest of time, so that's the idea here, that the experience of color is something in addition to knowing everything there is to about it. And there's another way of looking at it. There's American philosopher David Chalmers, who you might have heard about this idea called the hard problem of consciousness. He's the one who invented that word. And he gives us a thought experiment that is here called the philosophical zombie. This is not like a Halloween zombie, it's a philosophical zombie, and it's different in the sense that you have a human being that's a replica of a human being who is exactly like a human being. This brain structure, neurons, body, blood, everything is exactly the same. But the only difference between the second person and the first person is that they have no subjective experience. So when this person touches something painful, they say ouch, and the other person who does not have a subjective experience, they also say the same thing. So from the external observer's point of view, there's no difference between them. But is there a difference between them?
Yes.
So our intuition tells us yes, like one person has something extra that the other person doesn't have. So there's something that's in addition to the physical that the human being has. And as we talked about earlier, the existence of the first person experience is a type of experience that can't be denied. It's a definitive type of experience where in order for you to deny it, it still has to exist because there has to be something that's experiencing it. Okay, and then in medicine, how do we think about consciousness in medicine? And I think this will reinforce the way we look at it in Islam, actually. And medicine, I think, is useful because it's a type of science that's practical, that we're using science in the service of humanity, and it's more holistic than theoretical physics or theoretical neuroscience as it exists today. So, so how do we assess for consciousness in the medical setting? Traditionally, as you guys are probably learning, we would use the Glasgow Coma Scale. We ask the patient questions, we stimulate them, we examine them, see if they respond in a way that would confirm their consciousness, like do they obey commands, do they squeeze your fist when you ask them to, so on. But you know, there are cases where the patients are not able to do that, especially cases on the spectrum of the disorders of consciousness. And this becomes particularly important in patients who are in a minimally conscious state. So these are patients who are in a coma-like state where they have very little consciousness or no consciousness. So they might be confused with someone in a vegetative state. So in these patients, they have done these studies using functional MRI to see if the patient has consciousness. And when you do these studies with functional MRI, there's 3 levels of consciousness that you can establish. And these patients, they have no motor control, so you can't examine them, they can't talk, they can't move their fingers. But we can look at their brain and see if they have patterns of activation that would be consistent with a conscious patient. So one thing would be that you introduce a stimulus and you see if there's activation in the brain at all. Is there any uptake? So how does functional MRI work? Functional MRI basically is using oxygen metabolism as a marker for changes in MRI signal. As you know, oxygen goes through various types of metabolic changes when it's taken up by cells. But anyways, so one type is to see if there's even any activation. Second type is to see if the patient will activate on command, like you ask them to do something and they do it. And the third type is communicating. And obviously they can't actually do anything. So what are we asking them to do? You can ask them to imagine yourself playing tennis, and then we would know, okay, the areas of the brain that are associated with you know, spatial navigation would be activated. Or we can ask them to sort of imagine yourself walking through a room, and we know the areas that are associated with that would be activated. So based on asking them to do these types of things, you can ask them questions like, do you have a sister, right? And you can assess is the answer correct or wrong, and so forth. So you can sort of establish, and this is sort of a developing field, and these studies are varying level of certainty, but it's showing a lot of promise. And many patients have been upgraded from vegetative states to minimally conscious states based on this. But let's think about this. Like, what are we actually saying about the patient when we do this? If the patient was a philosophical zombie, what would their brain activation look like?
Nothing. Or like they
So
were
the
not.
philosophical zombie is physiologically exactly the same as a human, so they would do all the same stuff. So their brain activation would actually be the same, but they would be missing a conscious experience. So the point that I'm making is that in medicine, when we look at patients, we assume that there's a conscious experience. We assume that there's something additional here that the physical is indicating towards, but it's not capturing fully. It's so medicine, there's a very good article, which I'm not going to go over this whole set of additional discussion by Manzari on it's called, his article is called Dualism in Disguise. Basically, and part of it that I agree with him on here is on medicine, is that in medicine, we assume that there is dualism. We assume that there is something in addition, even when we do these studies. Okay, so now what? So what's happening is that many philosophers and neuroscientists are also realizing this. They're realizing that, hey, listen, there's something missing in our description of the universe. Like in this description, we are missing all this stuff that's not listed, that would fall under consciousness. And there's a growing movement to add consciousness as a building block of nature, similar to how we have charge and matter and things of that sort. Let's just add consciousness. And in a broad spectrum, this idea would be known as panpsychism, but there's variations of this. So in that case, everything would have consciousness, and human beings just have a lot of it because we are, more complex. So let's say that we added consciousness. Now we're getting a little bit advanced, but let's say we added consciousness to the building blocks of nature. Are we at the Islamic concept of the soul? Not really, but we're making progress. And to think about the spiritual experience or the subjective experience from an Islamic perspective or from a spiritual perspective, Sheikh Karmali and I were discussing this, and we came up with our own thought experiment, where you can think of two people. One of them is a real human, and the other one is a AI humanoid robot that looks just like a human being. Let's say that they're both praying. Let's imagine them both doing the same actions. They're both crying to Allah. There are tears coming down both of their cheeks. They're making dua. They're worried about their afterlife, or at least that's how it appears. Both of them, we're seeing both of them making dua. They're both making their zikr. They're both. We hear them praying to God, but one of them is actually having the experience of that connection with Allah, whereas the other one is just doing the actions. Are they both the same? So I guess the point here is that there's deeper levels of experiences that the human is capable of above and beyond what we talked about in consciousness. And that's really, as Sheikh Omar said, the Quranic verse that those who purify their soul are the ones who are successful. So that's what this would point to. That okay, I'll stop there. And then these are ultimately like, what is human nature? This comes down to the essence of human nature, is our ability to sort of self-modulate our mental states to go from arrogance to humility, self-admiration, gratitude, and so forth. So our ability to purify our soul is at the essence of what it means to be human. And then again, I think this sort of framework of looking at ontology helps explain a lot of this much better than what we currently have in science. But maybe we'll eventually get back to this after we exhaust all the physicalist options. Okay, do we have time for artificial intelligence, or are we? What time is it? 1:07. So we have 7 minutes. Okay. So so I'm just gonna talk about, there's a lot of stuff to talk about in AI, and you guys probably know more about it than I do. But in here, I just want to talk about some critical concepts that are going to be relevant to consciousness and to the human soul and to Islamic theology. So in terms of artificial intelligence, we have to distinguish between what's intelligence and what's consciousness. So Dr. Omar talked about the Turing test. The Turing test is back like 70 years ago. The computer scientists proposed this test called the Turing test. The idea was that once computers are able to basically dupe us or trick us into thinking that they're human, they would have achieved human level intelligence. At that point, there would be no difference between the human and the machine. But basically now with ChatGPT and all these language models, it's really, we're there. Like you can't tell the difference whether you're talking to a human or you're talking to an AI. And it's not unreasonable to think that an outside language models will also be in a similar situation. But then we have to distinguish between the idea of intelligence and consciousness. Intelligence is the ability to do things, to accomplish tasks, which is what intelligence is. And consciousness is to have that subjective experience, which is at the core of consciousness. So the question is, can they have that can an AI have the subjective experience? Chinese room, show it? All right, let's show it. This is a very short clip, actually. It's do you have it back there? Okay, so there's an American philosopher, John Searle, who comes up with this idea of trying to distinguish between the human and an AI in terms of how they would process information. And just in the interest of time, I'll let him explain. Okay, here you got it. Okay.
God can zap a soul into a fertilized egg or a newborn baby. There's no real reason to suppose he couldn't zap one into Harry as well. Harry can't reproduce, but neither can plenty of humans, and we don't call them non-persons. He doesn't have blood, but really, do you think that that's the thing that makes you you? Lycan says Harry's a person. His origin and his material constitution are different than yours and mine, but who cares? After all, there have been times and places in which having a different color of skin or different sex organs has caused someone to be
Oh, the timestamp.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the whole video, it's just a short segment of it.
to fool us. Let's head over to the thought bubble for some flash philosophy. Contemporary American philosopher John Searle constructed a famous thought experiment called the Chinese Room, designed to show that passing for human isn't sufficient to qualify for strong AI. Imagine you're a person who speaks no Chinese. You're locked in a room with boxes filled with Chinese characters and a code book in English with instructions about what characters to use in response to what input. Native Chinese speakers pass written messages in Chinese into the room. Using the code book, you figure out how to respond to the characters you receive, and you pass out the appropriate characters in return. You have no idea what any of it means, but you successfully follow the code. You do this so well, in fact, that the native Chinese speakers believe you know Chinese. You've passed the Chinese-speaking Turing test. But do you know Chinese? Of course not. You just know how to manipulate symbols with no understanding of what they mean in a way that fools people into thinking you know something you don't. Likewise, according to Searle, the fact that a machine can fool someone into thinking it's a person doesn't mean it has strong AI. Searle argues that strong AI would require the machine have actual understanding, which he thinks is impossible for a computer to ever achieve. Thanks, Thought Bubble. One more point before we get out of here. Some people have responded to the Chinese Room thought
Thank you.
experiment by saying
the AI, it's producing the same result, but it's lacking understanding and knowledge. And so we have to be careful here. What is the agenda? What is Searle trying to say? What they're trying to say is that there's a difference between the machine and the human. But those of you who are going to be going into neuroscience, the more we learn about how the brain operates, we might know that the brain actually operates a lot like a machine. Maybe it has similar algorithms and similar neuronal structures. And then what? Is the main difference between an AI and us that one's biological and one's electronic? Or is the main difference that God has given a soul to one and not to the other? Or is God capable of giving a soul to anyone he pleases? So anyways, these are more advanced questions that we should leave for a separate time. I'll stop here and I'll open up for any last comments or questions before we go to lunch. Go ahead.
When you spoke about the Kedem ontology earlier, is that like a certain framework proposed by someone, or like what is meant by Kedem ontology? Or like
Yeah, so like this, so within the Sunni school, this would be considered like the dominant theology between the Ash'ari schools and the Maturidi schools, both agreeing on a similar type of view of the world. And this is sort of a model. It's not a matter of belief, but it's sort of a model that they've constructed that helps explain the world and allows us to do science. Does that help? Or
like
yeah, there's other views, but this. Go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah. No, there's like that Sheikh Omar was saying, there's other views, like even our saying that the physical world exists is a metaphysical assumption. There's views that there is no physical world. There's only but in any case, this is sort of I don't want to use the word mainstream, but it's like a one of the primary views if you look at Islamic theological history on how we've constructed these things. Yes.
I'm curious if you have like further resources for reading about the like obvious contradiction that'll happen with this neuroscientific view of what it means to be experiencing, things like empathy. And then you have actual clinical diagnoses within the realm of psychiatry for someone who isn't able to experience empathy. So how can those two things exist? Psychiatry is a medical, specialty taught through these same, understandings. Is there discussion about this in some way?
So you're saying that there's some people who have empathy and some people who might not have empathy,
or the ability to experience empathy, or
yeah, and then that would be classified as a psychiatric disorder.
Disorder, yeah. Or like when we say that consciousness is like or collective of like it has to be related to some kind of physical structure, but empathy is like it's a human experience.
Yeah.
So
right.
How?
Well, we would say that empathy is a subjective experience. It's a conscious experience.
Right.
And then it would fall, if you look at that a kalam ontology again, it would fall under perception or idrak or and maybe not everyone has it.
Yeah.
It's not so like like in the Muslim view, like these types of subjective experiences are not the core of the soul. The soul is a immaterial substance, whereas these are accidents. They kind of go.
Right.
So they're created by God. But so yeah.
Yeah, I know. I don't know if
Yeah.
that was an actual properly worded question,
Yeah.
but that's just.
But that would be a very good question in philosophy of mind. Like what if someone doesn't have subjective experiences or certain types of them? Yeah.
I think we can relate that to Mary's room. How she was able to see the colors and then the apple came and then it was like a different experience. So I think it all goes back to our way of experiencing things. And then from there, having that growth or fruit that we kind of acquire and then it becomes part of our consciousness.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So like if they were to experience empathy, then they okay. Okay, we'll go here first and then we'll go there.
I'm wondering about something from like the beginning of the presentation when we were looking at the apple and like we're saying it's red, but then like neuroscience will kind of reduce that to the wavelength that you're seeing, and then how it kind of like becomes that argument, like all that very concrete measurement. But I'm thinking about like in terms of somebody who's colorblind, for example, and they like may not have the ability to perceive like a certain wavelength the same way that somebody who isn't is able to.
Right.
And I'm thinking about how like by like having this like reductionist approach to it, then you're able to create some sort of like therapeutic intervention that enables somebody to then perceive color in the same way as someone else. And so like when I was thinking about it through that lens, then the idea that like having a reductionist view can like remove some of the metaphysical and then you lose purpose in that. So I'm wondering like, is that always the case, or just what are your thoughts on like having a reductionist view and where that can actually bring back the purpose to medicine and like being able to connect spiritually with somebody?
Yeah.
Because of like having an understanding of like why something might be happening in a way that can be like dealt with physically.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good question. And that's like one of the main arguments that they would use for reductionism is that like perceptions can be misleading, right? They can be Like so someone might see the color red, someone might see the same as a different color. They might see it as blue, and so there's nothing objective about color. So it could be an illusion. So therefore, this type of reductionism makes sense. But from our perspective, like it doesn't matter where we put the color. And is the color in the apple or is it in our mind? But it does exist somewhere. Whereas with the reductionists are saying that the color doesn't even exist. Like it's only the wavelengths and the frequency. And then in terms of meaning, yes, like the reductionists, they will say that there can be meaning, but the only meaning that they're attributing is meaning in utilitarian sense of, you know, how the patient will do, you know, their sort of mental well-being or how, well, whatever meaning that we can give to it. Whereas there's no meaning being given from outside. There's no meaning from God. There's no purpose outside of what we give it. Anyway.
So consciousness is an emergent process. Emergent, not after that.
Like, so if I said that, Dr. Hassan will get upset, you know. But
Not reductionist.
yeah. So it's not reductionist and it's not emergent. Emergence would so okay.
We
So
talk about changing the body and mind. So.
Yeah. So there's a view in philosophy called epiphenomenalism, which is the idea that consciousness is just like a side effect of the functioning of the brain. The brain dysfunctions and like this consciousness emerges from it. Just like if you have a train and like there's smoke coming out of it, like it's just like a side effect that helps us get through life. But that's not our view. Like we think that the soul is real. The soul has perceptions that are real. Go ahead.
My question is related to that. It's the soul is real, right? And consciousness related to the soul, and the soul is owned by. The best we can do is approach a more holistic approach, like introducing like treating the heart when treating anxiety or something like physically treating the heart when treating anxiety, because the pulse, right, and liquid animal you mentioned, with stuff like that. So the best we can do is rather than mind consciousness is to make these approaches more holistic. Art could be can never approach consciousness.
Yeah, from a practical perspective, how this would translate into our medical practice. Yes, I would agree.
So like integrate like treating some of the parts, like heartbeats and stuff like that, and just more holistic.
Sure. Is anyone here in osteopathic medical school? Okay, good. So yeah, this was I went to a DO school too, so they'll talk a lot more about the interaction between the body and the mind and the soul, and how these things work. But the heart can have an effect on anxiety. But but I think the more interesting question, also another question, and that science can inform theology on is what is the role of the heart in consciousness? Yeah. And I think it's now what we know about neuroscience. We might have to look at interpreting those scriptural verses in a different way.
Yeah, the Quran talks about only the heart, most of it.
Yeah, like when it's referring. So yeah, so there are various words they'll use. Yeah. Okay. Time's up. Thank you very much, guys, for playing along.